Hey guys, what's up? I miss you guys. I wish that we could be doing this together, but I'm just going to give you a quick message. I've entitled today's message, Wonder or Wonder. I also want to encourage you to stay tuned to the very end because somewhere in the middle of it, there's going to be a special surprise for you, and I think you're going to be wanting to pay attention. So we're going to look at a passage today where a group of people get to decide whether they're going to be filled with a sense of wonder or wonder. Let's just look at the definitions real quick of these terms. To wonder is to desire or be curious to know something. To wander is to travel aimlessly. As I mentioned, we're going to look at a story, and just to set it up for you guys, in Numbers 13, you'll see that we'll pick up where God has promised the land of Canaan to the Israelites, and they decide to send 12 spies in to check out the land and to come back with a report. And so maybe you're like me, you know the song, 12 spies went to Canaan, 10 were bad, 2 were good. And so 10 spies come back with a report. And what all 12 spies agree on is that the land is great, it's prosperous, it's flowing with milk and honey. But these 10 spies can't seem to think how God can give them this land because they're strong men in the land and it's a great fortress. They have no faith. They're filled with doubt because of what they see. Although they know that God's promise was good, they can't believe that God can actually give it to them and make it happen for them. And so these 10 spies start spreading negativity all throughout the camp. And all the Israelites start to believe this, that they can't possess the land, although they had gotten there and the land was good, that they can't do it. They don't have what it takes. They're not strong enough. And so this negativity starts to spread, and people start to utter crazy things. They start to utter things like, I wish God would have never even brought us out of Egypt. I wish we would have just stayed there. Now we're here stuck in the desert. And so God is looking down at his people, and although he's been so faithful for so long, his people are not faith-filled. And so God is having this conversation with Moses, and he's frustrated. He's saying, I wish I would have just given you what you asked when you asked me to punish them for their lack of faith. And Moses pleads with him and says, don't take it out on them, spare them. And then we'll pick up in Numbers 14, verses 21 through 24. And it says this, the Lord replied, I have forgiven them as you asked. Nevertheless, as surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. So because Caleb has a different spirit, he's positive, he's faith-filled, he hasn't lost his sense of wonder, him and his descendants will inherit the land, but everyone else is sent into this wandering phase. And maybe you know the story as well as I do, that for the Israelites, this is when it started, that they wandered in the desert for 40 years. I wrote this down. This is my first point. I only have 2 more. When you lose your sense of wonder, you will wander. I also wrote this down as well. Without faith, there's no focus. When you lose your sense of wonder, you're going to wander. When you lose your faith, you're not going to have any focus. You're going to travel aimlessly. I was thinking about this story, and I was thinking about what it would feel like to be Caleb. You see, Caleb came back with a positive report, but yet he still was stuck in the desert. But he was the only one in the desert stuck there that wasn't wandering because he knew what his destination was. He knew what God had promised him. And so my second point is this: when you are left to wondering, remember God's promises. You see, Caleb was stuck in this desert, and he was experiencing all the things that the Israelites were experiencing, yet he was different. Even in Joshua 14, when they're about to enter the promised land, and all of these other people who had wandered in the desert had passed away and they weren't able to see it, Joshua and Caleb get to the promised land, and Caleb says this, now as you can see, the Lord has kept me alive and well as he promised for all these 45 years since Moses made this promise. Even while Israel wandered in the wilderness. I love that last part. He separates himself from the rest of the camp. He says, even while Israel wandered in the desert. He's saying, Israel may have been wandering, but I wasn't, because I knew what God had promised me. You see, when you're in the land of the unknown, you can either wander and be left with a sense of knowing that there's a focus, there's a faith, and knowing that God can do it, or you can wander. Caleb chose not to wander because he knew what God promised. You see, you can find yourself in a circumstance like Caleb. He had been positive. He came back with a good report. He was trusting what God promised him, and he was faith-filled. But yet he found himself in this scenario that wasn't in his best interest. He was stuck in this desert, in the hot sun, walking in circles for 38 years. It's interesting, if you know the story, the reality is they wandered in the desert for 40 years, but they really stayed in the same place for 38 of those years, walking in circles. And so Caleb is in the middle of this. He's stuck in the desert, and he doesn't know what his next step is. He finds himself in an outcome, a scenario that he doesn't want to be in. But I also wrote this down. When you don't know how come, remember God's outcome. When you don't know how come you find yourself, you might say, God, how come I'm here? God, how come we're not at school? How come my senior year sports got taken away from me? When you don't know why, when you don't know how come it is that you are here in this scenario, remember God's promised outcome. And I think that's what got Caleb through it all, through these 40 years of wandering with the rest of the Israelites in the desert. For those of you still with me, here's your special surprise. The first 5 students to text me will get a $5 gift card to either Chick-fil-A or Starbucks. So my number's on the screen. Text me right now. First 5 will get gift cards. My last point is this. When you wander with faith, you don't lose strength. In verse 11 of Joshua chapter 14, Caleb says this, I am as strong now as I was when Moses sent me on that journey, and I can still travel and fight as well as I could then. So give me the hill country that the Lord promised me. When you wander with faith, you don't lose strength. So all these years, Caleb had been stuck in a position where he was just in the desert, but yet he was still wandering with faith. He never lost sight of his sense of wonder, and because of that, he never lost strength. You see, I don't know about you, but I get this visual like Caleb is so old at this point, but yet he says, I can still travel and fight as well as I could then. Another point I said is God's promises are worth fighting for. And when you consistently be faith-filled, you will never lose strength. When you wander with faith, you don't lose strength. So don't let any circumstance or anyone prevent you from walking into God's promises. Maybe you know that God has promised you something, but maybe over time, because of your circumstances, you lose that faith and you're filled with doubt, or maybe there's people in your life that are telling you this can't happen for you. But when God promises you something, don't ever let any circumstance or anyone prevent you from walking into God's promises. And so Caleb believed this and he took it to the bank. And I love in Joshua chapter 14, he claims his land and he says, God promised me this land and I'm going to experience the promised land that God called me to, because I never lost sight of who he was. I never lost my sense of wonder, and I always fought with faith for what God promised me. And my hope is that although you might find yourself in a time of the unknown, kind of like Caleb and the Israelites, I hope that you choose to hold tight to what you know about God and remember what he's promised you and remember his faithfulness in the past, so that you can fight with faith and knowing that you serve a God who can do it. You serve a God who can take down the giants in the land, who can overcome a great fortress to give you what he promised you. And so my prayer is this, that although right now, there's nobody knows anything. We don't know how much longer this time period is going to last. My hope is that you can fight with faith and never lose hope and knowing that God has this and he's not surprised by any of this, and that he has a plan, and we can walk in confidence knowing that we can trust God's promised outcome. Let's go ahead and pray, and I'll see you next week through this video. So let's pray. God, thank you so much for your word. God, I thank you for this passage in the Old Testament. I thank you that we can look back thousands of years ago at a story where you were faithful. And God, we can know that there's not a day that's gone by that you haven't been faithful to walk with your people. And God, I thank you that even in the unknown, we know that we have promises that you have given us, that you have promised to us. And God, I pray that we hold tight to those right now in this period of the unknown so that we can continually walk in faith. God, we love you so much, and we're thankful that in this time you walk with us. We love you, Lord, and God, I pray that we just continue to fight with faith. In your name we pray. Amen.